Back in 2020, the Pacific Northwest endured one of the largest wildfire seasons on record. There were more than 58,000 fires that year, burning over 10 million acres of land. Wine country was not immune to the wildfires. In fact, the wildfires caused severe damage to the wine industry, both in the short and long term.
For the wine industry, this is both direct and indirect impacts. You'll see a fire either coming through a vineyard, and obviously the direct loss of crop or the facilities are more notable in terms of direct economic impact. You would have to replant that vineyard, reestablish your winery. The soil might not be as healthy going forward, so you might have to look into amending that soil. But more indirect impacts, which we've been seeing in more of the research scope, is the smoke that's actually going through a vineyard and can be absorbed by the grapevines themselves. And that's both the leaves of the grapevines and the grapes themselves. This alters the chemical composition of the grapes and the final product, the wine composition.
That's Arran Rumbaugh, a research chemist at the Crops Pathology and Genetics Research Unit in Davis, California. Rumbaugh is studying how smoke from wildfires can affect the chemical composition of wine grapes. Mainly, wines made from these affected grapes can produce an ashtray-like aftertaste. Now, wine growers sometimes aim for some unique tastes in their grapes, such as smoky, earthy, even tobacco. But ashtray taste? That's about as unappealing as it sounds.
The ashtray flavor, for me, it is much more of like a cigarette ashtray, but others perceive it a little bit more like a medicinal kind of a note to the ashtray. So it's hard to say one defining characteristic because people do perceive it slightly differently. It takes about 2 to 5 seconds to really perceive after you've swallowed the wine. And it's just that retronasal. It comes back after you've swallowed the wine and kind of sticks to the back of your tongue.
Definitely not the aftertaste consumers are looking for. And unfortunately, wine growers can't just go through their vineyards and pick out grapes that will produce that ashtray taste. Nothing's that easy.
The sensory portion of smoke taint won't be noticeable until after you make your wine, which is after you've already spent that money picking the fruit, making the wines, and processing and bottling it. So the industry wants answers much earlier in the process. They don't want to have to make their wine to know that they have an issue. They want to know prior to potentially even picking the grapes if there's an issue. That's really the focus right now in research, is understanding if we can detect these compounds and correlate it with sensory aspects of the wine.
Getting back to the 2020 wildfires, in California alone, an estimated $600 million worth of grapes were not picked that year because of potential smoke impact. Wine growers in Oregon, Washington, and Montana were also affected. The economic impact for the wine industry was estimated at around $3.7 billion.
This became an issue because we didn't know the full impacts of smoke in a vineyard. We didn't know the levels of these smoke marker compounds in grapes that led to an impact in the wines or that smoke taint in a wine. And what was happening is even if there's mild or moderate smoke exposure in a vineyard, they would not pick their grapes.
Rumbaugh is working on an early screening method that could quickly detect the smoke exposure and impact on grapevines. Currently, there's a handful of labs that can do this type of screening, but the turnaround could be weeks, and the cost to analyze could be expensive.
They can't wait weeks, especially during a harvest time. Most growers have a plan within a week to harvest because then they have to get their crew out there and arrange a lot of time schedules with that. So they need answers much quicker than 3 to 7 weeks. We are getting better. There's more labs now that can support this analysis to get results out faster, but that portable detection, or at least the screening method, would be very useful for the industry. They can at least understand if they're completely unimpacted, because that is something to note. Smoke can go through a vineyard and there's no impact. We don't know the smoke intensity and how that can relate to impact, and that's really what we're trying to model. And also give growers that information of you can pick your fruit, you can sell your fruit, or there's enough of an impact that maybe we should look into crop insurance if you do have crop insurance. That's really the area we're trying to define for the industry.
There are so many factors that go into whether grapes will endure the ashtray taste. Topography is one, but so is temperature, wind, and other environmental factors. The type of grape is also important, as different grape cultivars have different levels of impact and severity. Even the way they're produced can have an impact.
Yes, that is true. For instance, these compounds are still absorbed through white grape cultivars. However, the winemaking process is very different. The majority of white wine making, you do not have skin contact during the fermentation. This reduces the level that can be extracted into the final wine and therefore changing the susceptibility of white wines overall. With red wines, you actually ferment or produce that wine with skin contact, increasing the extraction of these specific smoke marker compounds, and then for increasing the concentration you see in the final wines.
I'm mostly a red wine drinker, big reds, like Cabs, Malbecs, Zinfandels. So I, for one, am hoping this research will help wine growers detect smoke concentrations early to avoid producing wines with an ashtray aftertaste. Detection is really the only solution here. I mean, wine growers can't just put up huge barriers to avoid smoke coming into their vineyards. And they can't keep their vines covered during wildfire season. Smoke from wildfires is going to find its way into the vineyards one way or another. And to make matters worse, wildfire frequency and intensity seems to be increasing.
From what we've been reading in terms of literature and the reports, there is going to likely be an increase in not only the frequency of wildfires, we're going to see an extension of the wildfire season, where normally that's occurring in potentially July at the earliest to August and September, and sometimes in October. In 2020, the wildfire season started in May and ended in November, where we had smoke throughout that whole 6-month period. We're only going to see an increase in the frequency, but also the intensity of the wildfires.
All the more reason why Rumbaugh's research is so timely. Her goal is to give winemakers the data needed to better manage their vineyards after smoke exposure from a wildfire. In some cases, they'll want to pull their vines to prevent making wines with an ashtray taste. But in other circumstances, if they find the grapes are unaffected, they could save millions of grapes from being discarded.
What was happening in 2020, many people were not picking their grapes just for not actually analyzing the concentrations of these compounds. They didn't know at what point these concentrations were going to cause an impact. But now we have a lot more information, and that can allow growers that even if you have smoke in a vineyard, you can still pick your fruit. It will be unimpacted, and you will actually see no sensory input in the final wines.
Check out the link in the description to learn more about Rumbaugh's research, and follow us on social media to get the latest updates. On to our next episode, where we're looking to help an invasive pest find love in all the wrong places.